You were listening to From Sobriety to Recovery with Jesse Mogul. Let's get to the show. Welcome back to From Sobriety to Recovery. I am your host, Jesse Mogul. I am in addiction recovery, second episode on the old YouTube. So for those of you who would like to see this live, feel free to go over there to YouTube and watch it on my channel. Just search Jesse Mogul or From Sobriety to Recovery. Should show up. Haven't quite figured all of that out. For those of you who are still auditory listeners, I appreciate you as always. We are 301 episodes into this whole amazing experiment and experience, if you will. And so today we're going to jump in because I still feel like I'm trying to figure out how to be on camera. And one of the first things I've decided to do was make it so I can't see myself on the computer screen so that I would stop watching me do this. So it's been, we'll see. We're growing into this. And I know that there's people out there who expertly do YouTube. And the point is to get the information out there, not necessarily be, the most photogenic, although I did make sure that I shaved and put some gel in my hair because I do want to look slightly presentable. So we have had an amazing opportunity to cover a lot of topics. And I thought with 300 episodes, there's so many that I could go back and I could reintroduce and discuss in more depth. Because a lot of those shows that I did 5 years ago in that episode 1 to 50 range have been topics that haven't really been reintroduced and let alone rediscussed. Although certainly there's been opportunities for me to touch upon them. I thought maybe go back into the archives and rediscuss a lot of these topics that have been in the archive for quite some time. And I thought the really good one that would be fun to bring about that I thought I had done, and maybe I switched it, episode 7 slightly made me think that I had done this one before, based off of the title alone. Let me see. I made a comprehensive list of all my episode titles. I think it's acceptance and non-judgment around recovery programs. So that's a potential one. I didn't go back and listen to it, and certainly, time being what it is, thought that would be less advantageous than just shooting another episode. If I'm correct, number 7 would have been around all the different ways that we could get sober. Because back then, I remember being very active on Instagram, and there was a lot of people throwing out, "You're a dry drunk and you're not really working a program." And I thought, that's really judgmental of people to say without really knowing an in-depth knowledge of what someone's doing. As for me, I was in Kaiser Permanente. I was going to meetings on Monday mornings, another meeting Monday night. I was meeting with my therapist on Wednesday nights. And then I was having my celebration of another week sober on Friday, make it through the weekend, and then back into that same pattern loop, that same way of behaving and going to the morning group meeting and then going into doing I think it was relapse prevention on Monday nights, and then doing a Wednesday with my therapist, and then there was a alcohol like awareness class on Wednesday nights that was only like 16 weeks long, but I just ended up looping through it like 3 or 4 times because I was just looking for structure and something to do with a bunch of other people who were also in sobriety and recovery. And that became my loop until football season started at month 7. And then that's when I went and got into Refuge recovery. And I started doing that on Sunday afternoons, I believe around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, because football was a huge trigger for me. It's what I really enjoyed drinking too. And I absolutely wanted to make sure that I had something going on that Sunday. I could go be around other people in sobriety and recovery, then come home and watch the night game. On the West Coast, football games start ridiculously early. So I think like 10 a.m. So by the time 4 o'clock ran around, the afternoon games were already done, and the night game was starting up at around 5 or 6. So it was a perfect little window of opportunity for me to add something into my program. So what we're going to discuss today are the many different ways of of utilizing recovery programs that you may have a lot of information about, and you may not have any information about, depending on where I'm finding you at in your sobriety and recovery journey. And so I do got some show notes because, I do like to show up prepared. Whether I follow them strategically or not, we will definitely figure that out along the way. What I would love for us all to take attention toward is that we want to release judgment around what recovery program other people are doing and whether we believe that that's going to work out well for them or not. A lot of studies have been done that show the recidivism rate into recovery programs is at about 80%. A lot of people could argue with that figure feel free to debate it as much as you want and waste your oxygen and energy doing that. But what it comes down to is roughly about 20% of people who enter into a recovery program will succeed that particular time. What I have learned through all of my research is that certainly the more that you get into different recovery programs, then your likelihood could increase. And I use could because there's a lot of subjectivity to the human experience. But certainly, if it's your first time going to an AA meeting, let's say, the likelihood that you succeed is about 20%. And that's not to discourage you from doing it, it's just to give you some realistic benchmarks to start setting for yourself, to realize that there's a lot of anchoring and there's a lot of memories and experiences and definitely habits that have been built around your active addiction. Even that of the people in your own family, they are very attuned at how to deal with you in your active addiction. And when then you go off and you get sober, even they have to figure out a new way to interact with you. So telling you 20% of people are going to succeed that first time around, second time around, third go around isn't again to discourage you. It's just to allow you to understand the facts of the numbers that are out there. And when people say AA is the way, get into AA, I promise you it'll work. SMART recovery, Refuge recovery, Dharma recovery. People who want to sit here and say that these are fail safe ways of getting yourself sober, no matter what, I promise you, you'll get sober this way. That's just not true. You cannot make promises like that to people whenever there are so many different variables that we have to take into play when we start to seek sobriety and recovery. I've known people who've gone to jail and to prison who've been like, well, at least I'll be able to get sober in there. And then it turns out their cocaine habit got actually worse. So even in prison, you don't necessarily get to immediately absolve yourself from your addiction and walk away from that and start to create a different life, which, is what we hope our prison system does. At the same time, there are a lot of drugs and opportunities to remain intoxicated within that system as well. So even there, it's not a foolproof way of making sure that you walk into it and come out of it sober. That's just not the way that that system is set up. And again, it's when humans are involved, you're going to find fallibility in something. So as far as old episodes that might also touch upon this, again, number 7, go back to check that one out. I'm a big fan of growth mindset versus fixed mindset in episode 23. Also, number 66, being patient in life and with your addiction recovery. And then number 166, recovery language patterns. And I'll put these into the show notes. I'm getting better, I hope, with my show notes, especially since I've flipped this over to video. So let's dive into this because what we're going to cover today is going to be Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, SMART Recovery, Refuge Recovery, Recovery Dharma, which is, I'll explain that one in a minute. Celebrate Recovery, LifeRing, and Moderation Management. And I went through the internet. There's a lot. There's young people in recovery. There's women in recovery. There's men in recovery. There's almost a subset for any ethnic or cultural variation that you might be. But these are definitely ones that I have come across that I've heard about on the street and out there in the real world. Excuse me. And so I know that people are using these. The ones I was less familiar with was LifeRing and moderation management. Again, I've heard about those when I've gone into addiction recovery centers to speak and put on presentations, but they're definitely not as prevalent as some of the rest of these that we're going to cover today. And we're going to start off with Alcohol Anonymous because that's the one everybody has heard of. Bill and Bob are the ones who started this whole thing up. Friends with Bill. Hey, are you friends with Bill? Is a way that people will say in public that they are in AA without necessarily saying outright we're in AA because it is supposed to be anonymous. Started back in 1935. It's got a strong religious connotation to it, even though it's definitely known for its 12 steps. And there's a lot of people who will say things like, well, I don't want to get involved in AA or NA when we cover that because it talks about a higher power. And I understand that in our society today, there's a lot of separation that people are trying to make between their faith and their external persona that they're putting on out there. But a lot of people do have spiritual beliefs. They do believe in some kind of higher power. And whether you want to rename that the universe or Mr. Rogers or Garfield, it doesn't really matter what you want to call your higher power. It is just one of the things that if you get into AA, NA, I mean, even in a way, Refuge and Dharma, because it's Buddhist based, they've got that going for them. A lot of people will try to decide not to go to AA simply because of the higher power. And there will be some religious people in there who do want to. I mean, I've been in meetings where people have just blatantly said God, and I'm not going to take offense to how somebody wants to frame their sobriety and recovery. Let them be them. I can be me. It's not like Celebrate Recovery, which we will cover here in a moment, where it's overtly religious and they sing Jesus songs, and they definitely are pulling scripture out and bringing that up in the meetings. And I've attended those as well, and I found them to be extremely enjoyable, even though I'm not necessarily overtly religious. So when we think about AA, we think about a 12-step program. We think about admitting that we are powerless to our addiction, embracing a higher power, doing a radical inventory of ourselves, making amends. There's the 12-step process. I'm not going to pour through every single one of the steps because we're not trying to turn this into an hour-long show. Just know that with AA, it's going to be 12 steps. And, there are markers that you get to achieve with a sponsor. That's what a sponsor does. They walk you through the steps versus somebody like me who's a recovery coach who does not guide people through the steps. Although they certainly will have an opportunity to be covered during sessions, it is not exactly explicitly why we meet versus a sponsor who is absolutely going to be guiding you through those 12 steps, mentoring you and nurturing you through the initial phases of sobriety as you seek to find a life in addiction recovery. If I had any complaint at all about the 12 steps, it's sort of like you finish them and then it's like, well, now what do we do? That's where the recovery coaching that I do steps in, because we can't necessarily teach everyone adulting 101, 102, 103 as we're going through the AA process. A lot of these people are just those who have gone through the program themselves. They don't have any professional training, any kind of extracurriculars that they've taken on around communication or coaching, or just nonverbal altercations, or how to reduce conflict within conversations. I mean, there's just a lot of education that they may not necessarily have outside of their lived experiences. And that's really where the power of AA comes in, is that you have someone who's worked the steps. You have people who've been attending these meetings in many cases for years, and then they're able to share that wisdom with you. Whether you're willing to embrace it or not, again, is subjective to your own perspective of whether you believe the things that they're saying. But we certainly hope that you find a sponsor that you can be able to, I almost said equate with, but I think it's more about just get along with, in regards to they're probably going to push you in a very uncomfortable way to do things that you're not familiar with. That's the peer support. That's working with the sponsor. That's doing the 12 steps. That's that personal guidance. If you're not religious, A doesn't demand that you be religious, although it does, again, have that very spiritual aspect to it when it discusses higher power. If you're an atheist and you just do not want to think at all about a higher power, then you might want to steer away from this one. Unfortunately, you might be missing out on a lot of benefits. Many benefits of AA start off with the fact that there's a lot of meetings and there's going to be a lot of times. And whether you're looking for in person or online, it just seems like there's a plethora of them because it's been around for so long. It is one of those that is extremely established. And so what I like to just be a big proponent of is release the judgment, step into it, take what you need, leave what you don't, and realize that there's so many things to learn in life when you step into sobriety and recovery that you would be remiss to miss out on something that could be extremely helpful and powerful simply because you've got a predisposed decision-making process around that, or you've already believed the stereotypes. This goes right back over into NA as well. So we have Narcotics Anonymous, which was launched in the early 50s. I want to say 53. And regardless of when or why it was explicitly launched, Narcotics Anonymous is absolutely for those who have a drug dependency issue over just having alcohol. Although I would often find that alcohol and drugs do seem to be prevalent in someone. If you do drugs, you more than likely are also drinking. But if you're drinking, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing nefarious, like hardcore drugs like cocaine or meth or heroin or LSD or any of those. But if you're doing drugs, you're more than likely probably also tipping the bottle a little bit too much as well. It also follows the same 12-step program. It also has the sponsors. It walks you through things. I mean, it's basically relatively the same exact program. It's just people are going to be talking about doing illicit drugs there versus in the AA meetings where it's probably just going to be people talking about alcohol. I have had people attend these meetings and say that they wanted to bring up their drug addiction in an AA meeting, and that was rejected. I've never witnessed that myself. So, again, that's the story that they've told me. And so that's the experience they had. I would imagine that there's got to be some level of acceptance within the AA and NA community that you're probably going to have a crossover with some of these things. And we're not necessarily going to tell somebody to get the hell out simply because they don't want to follow are rules. Although there are some rules in AA and NA that I have noticed that aren't necessarily held to as tightly. Cross talking and double dipping, where you would talk across if a subject gets brought up. And then double dipping is where you might get to speak twice during that meeting. I have seen it happen when there's smaller meetings, same with Refuge and Dharma. I've seen it happen in SMART Recovery meetings and even Celebrate recovery meetings. If the group is small enough, in let's say like 3 to 5 people, and you've got 40 minutes to talk, there's a very good chance that people are going to speak more than once. But if there's a room like my first Refuge recovery meetings, those were held in East Hollywood, and there would be 50 to 75, sometimes 100 people in these things. You weren't double dipping. And if you really wanted to speak, you better get your hand up quick because there's a likelihood that you may not have an opportunity because the group was so big. So back to the NA, again, we're looking for non-judgmental places. They certainly would like to push that narrative. Again, these are being run by humans, and I've got some clients who will tell me that the humans in these NA meetings don't necessarily live up to their expectations. And while we have episodes coming up about expectations being the leading cause of disappointment, when you step into these meetings and you take on a role of leadership, maybe it's being a sponsor, being the organizer, being the speaker, there is a level of acceptance that you are expected to take on for the other people in there, because we don't know what their lived experiences are. But if they're sitting in one of these meetings, then they've had a rough go at things. And we want to offer them as much embracement of who they are without having them feeling rejected, while also staying within the boundaries of the rules that have been set up, the double dipping and the cross talking and the showing up late and things of that nature. We do want to potentially hold firm to those, but if somebody wants to start talking about something that makes us uncomfortable in these meetings, what they're saying isn't meant to make us feel comfortable. It's meant to help them speak out loud in a room of people who are willing to embrace it. So that's NA and AA. And again, I could do a whole hour on these things. I'm not an expert in either. I have attended meetings of both, but I did not walk myself through the steps, nor did I have a sponsor do that with me. We did variations of step work at Kaiser Permanente, and that was really enjoyable, but it wasn't necessarily something that I stuck with, just mainly because I already had so many different things that I was doing that I didn't necessarily, I mean, I look back at it and it just was not something that I needed at the time. I'm going to flip over here and share screen real fast just so that you guys can see. Here's the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I'm again, not too hard to find, aa.org. And if you jump over here to the NA website, then you get to see that is also there. And a lot of it is going to give you some background information. And it's also going to give you the opportunity to find meetings in your area. There's apps built for this. There's a lot of opportunities for you to be able to uncover ways to be more involved in this community if that's what you decide you want to do. Let's move over to SMART Recovery. Founded in 1994, very heavily on cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational enhancement therapy, CBT, and MET. It's, again, they call it secular because it doesn't really have any at all religious connotation or affiliation with it. It's looking for you to have that level of self-empowerment to it. Longtime listeners of the show will recognize what I'm getting ready to say. It very much wants you to figure out how your thoughts and your feelings begin to affect your behaviors and ultimately lead to your outcomes. I have whole episodes, I think, called CT-FAR. I don't have that episode number brought up in front of me, but it definitely talks about, let me see how fast I could find that CT-FAR. We're trying it. We're doing it. Nope, it's not wanting to do it. I know there's one called CT-FAR somewhere on here. Let's see if I hit enter. CT-FAR. Yeah. Okay. So this is actually I mean, again, we're just winging it over here. Episode 229. is CTFAR. That stands for circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. That was actually initially introduced to me in that method: circumstance, thoughts, feelings, actions, results, by Brooke Castillo. She's the host of the Life Coaching School podcast. Huge fan of hers. I was introduced to her by somebody in a Refuge recovery meeting right when I had first started, and I got a hold of her, and I actually joined her network and became one of her life coaching student people. So she was a mentor of mine, not ever personally, just through Zoom and things of that nature, but certainly she helped me understand the mind even more so than I already was diving into that. And so it was a huge fan. I did forget to show you guys the big book. Here's the AA big book. You can find this. I found this at a used bookstore for like $3. You can find this all over the internet if you want to get a hold of the AA big book. And then I showed you the Refuge one earlier. We'll bring that back up whenever it's time to speak about that one. But going back to SMART recovery, it's very cognitive behavioral therapy. I believe Brooke Castillo, was it? Oh, I can't remember the name of who she said introduced her to this whole thoughts, feelings, actions, results thing. It'll come to me later on whenever it no longer is as pertinent it is would be right now. But again, smart recovery, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's where you're going to start to manage your thoughts, your behaviors, your emotions, and really dive into that. A lot of cognitive behavioral therapy is said about figuring out where the anchoring systems are inside of you that have created the habits that you're now trying to walk away from. It's got a bit of a Adlerian, Freudian kind of mix to it, because it does really put some effort into figuring out where a lot of this stuff is rooted at within you. It's got the 4 points, and now I have to go to the show notes: building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life. I put a lot of my coaching around these, right? We get motivated to get sober. Maybe our life went to hell, maybe we rock bottom, whatever it might be, but we feel that initial surge of motivation. But then as we get further and further away from that initial spark, then the voice is telling us that we need to go back, that we have the urges, we have the cravings, we have the needs that we need to fulfill through the alcohol, drugs, yada, yada, yada. This is where you get an opportunity to dive into that in a group setting. Again, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's understanding, like Brooke Castillo would have said, God, how can I not remember the person that she referenced it? It's somebody who's super famous, at least in the self-help world. But she talks about how a circumstance, this is a circumstance. I am currently in a circumstance of talking into a microphone in front of a camera. What thoughts do I have from that? What feelings, what emotions might be coming from that? What are my actions that are being fed, that come from the thoughts and the feelings? And then what kind of outcome does that give me? This is where cognitive behavioral therapy will be able to help you. When I first got into, I got some other books over here. When I first got into neurolinguistic programming, my favorite one is The Essential Guide. It's the purple one. You can find that anywhere you buy books, at least on the internet. I don't know about bookstores. Now we're just going to whack the microphone while we're at it. Here we go. See, we're just playing with it. We're just winging it, people. Hope you enjoy all the winging it over here. I got like emotional intelligence 2.0. I brought up, I think, Carol Dweck's mindset in the last podcast. I also brought up Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I can't find my copy of Carol Dweck's Mindset, which tells me that I loaned it out to somebody, because I always have a copy of that book. Nor can I find my my copy of Recovery Dharma. So I no doubt I loaned that one out too. And when I loan out books, I don't expect to get them back. So smart recovery is going to be using a lot of that neuro-linguistic programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, the psychology aspect of it. That's the part I got into when I first got sober. I wanted to understand the psychology of addiction. What led me to continue the loops that were taking me back to a place in life that I was no longer happy with. I loved that. I went to Smart Recovery in Santa Monica, right outside of Los Angeles, where I lived for, I think, about 6 months. And then the meetings got difficult to go to. And, at that point, I was really just dipping my toe in a lot of things. And therefore, Smart was part of that, but I also was already getting that through neuro-linguistic programming. So to me, I got what I needed, and then I walked away, which is what I think a lot of us could start to take on as a energy, is that go in, experience it, see how it benefits you. And if you ultimately decide that you don't want to attend anymore, that wasn't wasted wasted time. It's learned experiences. Take what you need, leave what you don't, and realize that some of the things that you might be leaving might be programmed in your brain to ignore. So make sure that you're stepping into an uncomfortable space as frequently as possible in your early sobriety and recovery, because that's probably where you're going to be learning new things. And some people would push back against that and say, don't shock your system so much that you end up getting scared or frustrated or overwhelmed that might lead you back to your addiction. In this day and age, I could not even begin to bring out all the different hypotheticals of what might trigger you. Even that word, some people get upset with trigger and they would rather it be said as activation or sparking or whatever it might be. We're going to want to reduce the charges that we have around certain words, because we can't walk around with a muffle, putting it over people's mouths every time they say something that might be triggering. You may have been sexually assaulted, and if somebody else has as well, and they start to share that in a meeting, and you're like, I can't deal with somebody else talking about that. Now you're muting somebody else who might very much need other people to hear that. And so we just want to be mindful of how our recovery might be affecting other people's recoveries when we're getting into these opportunities for a group atmosphere. And that's what all of these things I'm talking about are. For those of you watching on YouTube, there's the Smart Recovery. Again, I'll put these links over in the show notes, but basically this site really just exists to help you locate a meeting and figure out where you could be going so that you can, don't end the meeting. Let's stop the sharing. Did I stop the sharing? I think I did. Let's go back and see if I can share again. Perfect. So that's Smart Recovery. If you need more structure than what Smart Recovery offers, again, it has that 4-point system. So there is a very clear framework: maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life. If you like online support over in-person meetings, Smart's got you covered there too. A lot of these organizations came out with a very strong online presence because of the COVID experience, and they just never let up off the gas on that. All right, I do this on the podcast a lot. I take drinks of water and nobody ever has to see it, but now you guys are. 'Cause I'm talking a lot. This is where it'd be really helpful if I had somebody else on the show. Then they could come on and then they could say some words, and then I would be able to drink my water without interrupting the show. Oh, yeah, and I'm not editing that out. Nope. Hope you enjoyed it. I have other things to do, like shoot more episodes, plan more episodes. I've got water's good. Maybe that's what it was. You get to see me drink water. Now you understand that water is really good. The next one, Refuge Recovery. We're also going to cover Recovery Dharma. So we've got the Refuge Recovery. We've got, I want to say this, the website's called Recovery Dharma. I was calling it Dharma Recovery for the longest time, but ultimately I'm going to go with what the website wants to call it because that seems to be, let's believe the people who run the organization. One of the things that's interesting about this, and I'll jump over here and I'll show you guys the websites real fast, just so that if you decide that you want to go over and check these out, that you'll know you're in the right place. There's the Refuge Recovery site. It's got people sitting on a beach. I'm imagining that's probably whenever this whole thing first started off. Noel Levine started this thing long time ago. And then there's the Recovery Dharma. And again, this will give you background. This will give you opportunities to read the book. I think you can even download the books for free on their websites. So there's two different ones. I'm not going to get into all the baby mama drama for why there's two different ones of these. It used to just be one. It used to just be the Refuge Recovery. Something happened in the higher ranks of this entire organization that caused an offshoot of it to be created called Recovery Dharma. If you want to get into other people's businesses and get into other people's drama, you can YouTube videos about this. There are people who talk about why it's split. That's not what I want to talk about today. I wanted to focus on the fact that let's see, 2014 was Refuge and 2019 was Recovery Dharma. They're both Buddhist based. They're inspired. They'll go over the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and they usually read a little bit of something at the beginning, and then they go into a 20-minute guided meditation. It's not like someone's talking the entire time, but certainly they generally are reading a meditation out of their book. Again, I have the Recovery Dharma book. It's either lost in the office of the madness that is my mind, or I lent it out to somebody, and that's probably what I did. But both of them have opportunities to read like meditations out of them, and it's pretty cool. You get to meditate for 20 minutes. If you're not familiar familiar with meditation, that can be a little off-putting, maybe even scary to put yourself in that kind of situation with strangers relatively when you first start. I can assure you, as someone who had not meditated before I started going to Refuge Recovery, I found it very amenable, very enjoyable. It was something that was actually quite surprising to me how relaxing it was. There are definitely some times where I wondered whether I was in a deep meditative state or asleep. but, but either way, I really enjoyed it. When I came out here to North Alabama, Huntsville, where I currently live, there wasn't a refuge recovery, but there was the recovery dharmas. And so I started going to those. And again, no difference to me at all in these meetings. We're still reading the Four Noble Truths. We're still reading the Eightfold Path. It does talk a lot about how suffering is an inevitable part of the human existence. Some people aren't really thrilled with hearing life framed that way. But again, take what you can, leave what you don't, and realize that there is suffering in life. And we've gone through a lot or we wouldn't be here. Whether we have to continue experiencing life as this suffering experience, that is, obviously a choice we get to make, even though we do realize that there's going to be flat tires on the side of the road, there's going to be sick family members. Isn't it better if we can step into the world of being around all of that stuff and with a sober mind? It makes me think of the coach in Friday Night Lights, clear mind, clear heart, something to that degree. So I remember it just enough to probably screw up the quote, but I always like the idea of having a clear mind and a clear heart. So if you struggle with meditation, it's a really cool way of just being introduced to it in a very friendly setting. Again, they're both focused on the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. If you've got a thing with Buddhism and you don't, again, want to be involved at any level of spirituality, I've gone to these meetings for years. Most people aren't necessarily talking about Buddha and Buddhism. And again, I've had people talk about Christianity, Judaism, Islam. There's been a lot of different religions brought up there because it's really just, to me, a very open experience that doesn't require you to believe in anything other than yourself and your desire to get sober and step into addiction recovery. Celebrate Recovery. Now, this is different. This is formed in 91 out in California. It is absolutely positively religious. If you've got an issue with Jesus, God, you don't want that in your sobriety and recovery, you are not going to want to go to Celebrate Recovery if you feel that strongly about it. Because when I first moved to Huntsville, I went for like the first 3 or 4 months I was here before I found recovery, Dharma. And again, I really enjoyed it. Some of the people, were some of the people, and there's always going to be people that you like and don't like at the meetings. But as far as the meetings, when I loved them. I love the standing up and the singing. I don't mind any kind of God like presence in my addiction recovery. While I don't necessarily, read the Bible regularly, I haven't attended church in quite some time. By quite some time, I mean, other than these one-offs here and there when somebody might invite me and I would go to just be a part of the experience that they wanted to share with me. I have not attended myself a regular church service, I don't think ever in my entire life. And I really enjoyed Celebrate Recovery. It does have a 12-step program as well. It combines those traditional steps of AA, but with biblical principles. And again, it's like if AA had decided not to step away from a strong, God presence in its meetings, and having not been around in the 30s and 40s and 50s, I don't know what AA was like then, but certainly now it's more of they will just say believe in a higher power, release yourself to the higher power and believe in the strength that it can provide for you. But it doesn't necessarily want to bring up God and Jesus, whereas Celebrate Recovery is all God and all Jesus all the time. Again, really enjoyed it. I just thought it was so cool. 12 steps. They've got the supporting people. They've got the sponsors. They've got the, meetings all around the world. There's online ones as well. If you're not Christian, it is explicitly faith-based, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to understand when you go in. Again, with all of these, if you have an opportunity to find one around you, I cannot stress enough that you should at least go check it out. What I want to say about Celebrate that I found really interesting that not any of the other meetings I've attended have done is that Celebrate has a belief system that you're not just seeking sobriety from alcohol and drugs or any of the process addictions, shopping, gambling, sex, porn, all that stuff. It actually, people would get up there and be like, I'm 7 days sober off of getting angry with my wife. I'm 10 days sober off of getting angry with my husband or my children. I'm 14 days sober from being jealous about my neighbor's new boat. things like that. Like they realize that there's a lot going on within this human ecosystem that we're living in, and therefore, they actually give an opportunity for people to speak to that too. So I would hear a lot of people say, I'm 30 days off of being angry, or I'm 30 days off of eating out of sadness. Somebody who absolutely had an alcohol issue, but now is also able to bring some of these other issues that they have. And a lot of them were emotions based, and they would be like the jealousy, the shame, the guilt, the anger, the fear. They would be bringing those up. It was just really interesting because I'd never been to a meeting before where they were going to give you a chip for not yelling at somebody in your house for 7 days. But I thought, that is also an addiction, is the way that, I mean, I've got a whole episode about anger and fear coming up down the line. Certainly, a lot of our emotional responses can be programmed. They can be habits. And if they start to adversely affect our lives, whether internally or externally, we're starting to really swim in the pool of the definition of addiction. So I thought it was really cool that that's what Celebrate did. LifeRing and moderation management. So LifeRing is also a 12-step based program. Again, it's not really pushing any of the religious connotations that you might experience in Celebrate, or even the spirituality component necessarily that you would feel over there in the AA and the NAs. We are going to pull these up real fast for those of you watching on YouTube, because now it's almost like I'm just trying to teach myself how to jump back and forth. Here's the LifeRing. Again, it's abstinence-based, anonymous organization, sobriety, secularity, self-help. You can go over to their website. You can learn about their bookstore. You can find the meetings. You can start a meeting. A lot of these give you an opportunity, even if you're at a very young stage of your sobriety and recovery. I mean, you don't want to be doing this at like month 1, but you can have, a certain amount of sobriety experience under your belt. I've seen people with as little as 6 months start up a recovery Dharma or Refuge recovery meeting, or start up a LifeRing meeting. So some of these are just so excited for people to start up meetings. If you wanted to start up a SMART recovery meeting, there's actually a whole package. I think I almost signed up for it last year. I might still down the line. I think it's a couple $100, and they put you through some kind of training, because it does have a psychology mechanism component to it, and they're not necessarily trying to put people out there who don't have some kind of training with it. I just gave a little college try to putting the recording on pause while I coughed. Let's see how that shows up in the recording. That would be pretty cool. Then you wouldn't have to watch me drink water anymore. So LifeRing, we're looking to create your own recovery plans. Where the meetings focus on the success stories, fostering a supportive environment, and encouraging positive behavior. If you need more structure, this is what my notes have me saying right now. LifeRing's flexibility may appeal to some, but could be less structured than the 12-step program. So again, if you're looking for more structure, that might be where you want to go back over to Celebrate or AA or NA. And again, you can actually find mentors in Refuge and Recovery Dharma, and therefore they'll walk you through their own system. Again, if you're looking for that concrete structure that's been tried and true, we look no further than AA or NA, since they've been around since 35 and 53. Certainly, you're going to be able to find structure there. Some people don't necessarily want to do 30 meetings in 30 days and be told to go to 90 and 90 and all of that stuff. That's where I fell into. I didn't want to start going to meetings every single day. There was a part of me that didn't want to get addicted to going to meetings. And again, that's my own subjective perspective. Don't take that as a narrative truth about how you might experience it. I have no judgments. You want to go to 14,000 meetings in 14,000 days, have at it. If every single morning you get to enjoy the beautiful thing of waking up sober, like my little word thing said back there. Am I pointing at it when I do that? Almost. Okay. Not bad. Not bad. I had to flip back to the camera. Um, but by all means, I want you to be able to wake up sober and enjoy that. And if LifeRing or moderation management is the way that you end up doing it, then more power to you. Just know that there is a system out there that's going to heavily emphasize self-empowerment and building up that sober self. I have in my notes, it discourages reliance on a higher power, or the concept of powerlessness. Now, what's interesting about that, it's the powerlessness. I had an issue with saying that I was powerless against my addiction. I'm not silly. I'm not foolish. I do not think that I can go off and have a taste of Jameson and that just be a one-off thing. I am wise enough about myself to realize that when I once told one of my best friends that I I wish the ocean would just turn into Johnny Walker Blue so I could just swim out into the depths of it and just be swallowed up by the deliciousness that is, whiskey and scotch and vodka and bourbon, and drown myself in my sorrows. I don't think that that necessarily has gone away. I think if I were to taste alcohol, taste drugs, there would be that part of me that, once that sort of hit my lips, I would be like Frank the Tank, and I may not end up running down the street naked, into the quad, up into the gymnasium, but I certainly think that over the course of time, that little lapse could turn into a full blown relapse. So I'm not foolish enough to say that I have any kind of power over these substances. I am smart enough to know that I have reached my limit. If somebody is born with a certain amount of days to drink and do drugs, I've far and away eclipsed all my allotted days. I'm fine with sobriety for the rest of my life. It's the powerlessness part. I don't necessarily want to go around saying that I have no power. I can certainly reframe that and say that it is very powerful, and therefore I will keep it out of my life so that I don't even have to try to ride that bull. That's a lot of what I think about whenever when people ask me, "Would you ever go back to drinking? Do you ever think that you might relapse?" It's like getting on top of a 17,000-pound bull and expecting that I can stay on for 8 seconds and be like, yeah, once in a while I might stay on for 8 seconds, and then the other times it might flip me off in a second and a half and then stomp on my chest. I'm good. I'm good. There's other people who want to keep riding that bull. Hope you figure out your way, but I have no desire to ride the bull, to chase the dragon, to do any of those things. So the powerlessness, you might be a little off put by that word. Certainly, discouraging a reliance on a higher power. That's probably going to be more self-reliance based. I've never personally attended enough LifeRing meetings to be able to say acutely whatever I would have learned would be something that would be meaningful enough to pass on. But certainly, I've been introduced to them and thought, okay, this is an approach, and I'm down with all approaches. So, seeking that non-religious, self-directed recovery is where LifeRing might step in for you. And then there's moderation management, and this is going to be why it's at the end too. Is that this is for the people who just want to dip their toe into what it might be like to not drink as much anymore. And again, for those of you on YouTube, you're now getting a chance to see their website that's for this. It talks about moderation, how to just, I guess, ride a less humongous bull than that 17,000-pound one I just referenced. Again, I tried the moderation route for quite some time, and that never seemed to stick for me. Inevitably, I would go back to the same levels of drinking and drugging that I had been doing previously. But there are some people who might be on that cusp of taking it or leaving it, and that might be an opportunity for you. Well, I will say that I have learned from going into a lot of addiction recovery centers is that when moderation management has been brought up, it was a really great introduction into beginning to abstain and to slowly wean yourself off of this. And I do a lot of recovery coaching with people who are deeply involved in their alcohol or drug of choice. And for some of them, weaning them down from 7 days a week in a 12 pack, or taking Kratom every single day, 10 times a day, or doing blow 4 times a week, getting them to come down off of that. And maybe it's now we're down to a 6 pack every 3 days. And now we're down to a little bit less of the cocaine. Maybe we're doing a little bit less of the other drugs. Like, there is a possibility for weaning something off if you don't have the money to go into an in-person treatment center where you might have to check yourself in for 30 days. Again, this is really important that I'm going to stress it time and time again, that we understand that there's no one path to sobriety and recovery, that there's so much infinite hypotheticals that we can come up with for every single human, that to say, well, no, moderation doesn't work, Jesse, and how dare you push that, is leaving out that your perspective is not objective. It's subjective to your own experiences, your memories, your life, your attitudes, your beliefs, your opinions, your values, things that you've actually gone through. Somebody else might have, well, not somebody might, somebody will have an entire different scope of how they perceive reality around them. And to simply say moderation is not going to work ever, 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 ever for anyone, Again, I would be so remiss to say that. I would almost be, I would lose a lot of credibility. So, if there is an opportunity for someone in your life to just start to seek a level of moderation, when we think about the stages of change, when there's that pre contemplation, most people aren't even thinking that there's anything wrong. When they get to stage two, which is contemplation, and as they move into stage three, which is planning, that might be where moderation management meetings come into play very strongly. And they might be able to really guide someone, maybe you, maybe somebody in your life, down a path where it's like, okay, well, now I'm contemplating what sobriety would be like. Now I'm making plans for what it would be like to go to a wedding or a party, a bar mitzvah, a birthday, just going out on a Saturday afternoon and going to a sports bar to watch your favorite football team. Now I'm starting to think about what that life without there being a drink in my hand could be like. And moderation management would provide you with those opportunities. It says here that in my notes, it's encouraged to take a 30-day break. There's a lot of different people on the social media platforms schlepping 7, 14, 30-day hiatuses away from alcohol and drugs. I've never taken any of those people's classes and programs. I don't know if they would be beneficial, but certainly, if it comes in at a price point that feels comfortable to you and you're ready to step into that, then by all means, you could purchase their program. But moderation management offers you opportunities to be able to do that without paying a fee, and doing it around other people as well. Because if you're the only one in your crew trying to stay sober or moderate, it may only take 2, 3, 4 beers before moderation just turns into screw it, let's just do some shots. That might be where the moderation, of trying to go to an establishment and moderate your drinking versus what they're talking about, which is just taking a 30-day break and seeing what your life will be like. Generally, you will notice some improvements because you'll probably be less bloated, less hungover, eating less junk food late at night because you have you're nobody makes wise, healthy eating decisions at 2 in the morning. Okay. I'm going to take back the word nobody because I swear there's probably somebody out there who's like, I just made a delicious plate of broccoli, carrots, and cauliflower, and I'm 9 sheets to the wind. I'm sure it's happened somewhere. The likelihood of happen regularly is probably very minimal. I think I've said enough about this. What if one program doesn't work for you? Recovery is personal. I want you to explore various options. I want you to step into things, releasing judgments that you might have about what I've said, what other people might say. It's all about information. And if you can bring in enough information and then take action on that information, now you're starting to move the needle. Just learning about a bunch of things and then going back to your normal life isn't going to be really pay off any dividends because it's action from the knowledge. So I would say, go to a lot of different kinds of meetings and see which one resonates. You may not have any religious connotations at all, affiliations or otherwise, and then you go to a Celebrate Recovery and you're like, I just like the fact that everybody sings. I don't really care what they're singing about. I just like the fact that they sing. Um, how do you know if you need peer support or professional help? Peer support groups offer the community, and the community is often what we're lacking whenever we try to do this on our own, especially if nobody else in our crew, our social circle, our family has gone through this, wants to actively talk about sobriety frequently, or help you sort of muddle through and clean out your closet, versus these peer support groups that absolutely are a place for people to go be vulnerable, expose your traumas, expose your sufferings, and talk about it in a room full of people who may not completely understand where you're coming from. Because again, we all have our own life experiences and how we've internalized those, but they will absolutely be able to empathize and have compassion for the things that you're going through. If you need professional help, understanding if you've got some underlying mental health issues, significant emotional challenges. Do you have a lot of PTSD, potentially from any kind of assault or abuse? Would you say that some of your mannerisms might require a diagnosis for a disorder? Then you might want to go see professional help. I have found professional help to be very enlightening and very important to me. I've had a therapist now for most of my recovery. I had my one out in LA that took me about a year and a half. I just had him now, got him back about a few months ago. But I love therapy. It's my favorite hour of the week. It is literally my time to just go talk about what's going on in my life and have somebody help guide me to a stronger place of empowerment. I don't go in there feeling like I'm a victim as much as I'm just being challenged by the world. And how can this person be my coach as I create a different way of experiencing my life? Because don't fool yourself into thinking that the way you're experiencing it is the absolute only way to experience life. There's a lot of variables. that you may not even be aware of, and the ones that you are aware of, you can choose to shift. You can choose to reframe, and that's what I would really be a strong proponent for as I close up this show, is you realize that you can choose to frame a recovery program however you choose to frame it. And if somebody else tells you that it was a bad experience for them, take that with as much importance as you would if they said a restaurant sucked or a movie wasn't any good. A lot of people tell me some movies suck and I shouldn't go see it. And then I go watch it and I actually liked a lot of things about it. Or some people will say that restaurant's horrible. And then I realize or find out that they went on a Friday night when during it was slammed and they were short staffed. There's a lot of things that could be happening inside someone else that has them now externalizing to you how disappointed they were in any one of these that I just brought up. But that's not necessarily going to be your experience. So I would push you to go and experience as many of these as you possibly can, whether online. I highly recommend in person. There's just something about having people in the same room. They've all taken the time to drive there, to be there, to sit there with one another in all of that, rather than just doing it like you would normally do it in front of your computer, like you would a work meeting or calling up Nana, right? Like go somewhere so you can establish a new anchor about and around being other people in sobriety and recovery. So that's it. I got a lot. I hope I said a lot. It's just so interesting being on camera now doing these versus having just always been doing them with just a headset on and not any of this other lights and the microphone in front of me now. I'm not going to judge it for it feels more difficult than it probably actually is, just because it's new. But I plan on just, this is what we chose to do. I chose to do it. So I'm riding or dying on this train. I hope you over there on the auditory side, listening to it streaming. Again, if you wanted to see any of the visuals I threw up, I don't know if I'm always going to do that, but just something cool about setting these up with the website and being able to show it to people just seemed like a fun thing to do. Plus, I've been wanting to see if I could share the screen. So if you are interested in seeing any of these, they will be in the show notes. I know Spotify doesn't let you click on show notes, so active links don't necessarily work there. I think they might work in Podbean. I'm pretty sure they work in Apple iTunes, but they'll definitely work in YouTube. So jump over to YouTube if you want to subscribe and hit notification or leave a comment, whatever you do you on that. As far as being able to access the links that I provide, I know that YouTube keeps all their links live, and I'll make sure that they are live whenever I go to put this up. So that's it, my friends. Moderation management, LifeRing, Celebrate Recovery, Recovery Dharma, Refuge Recovery, SMART Recovery, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. These are how many did I get all told? 8. These are the 8 I chose to go through. There's probably a lot more. Again, young people in recovery. I used to speak at some of those during, I think, COVID, because I came across a listener of my show was also in YPR out there. And I want to say she at the time was living in Louisville. And so it was pretty cool to have a chance to speak there. Whether you go to a meeting and start to seek active support with other people, or you're just going to a mental health professional, just realize that the journey from sobriety to recovery is one that is going to have its ebbs and flows, its highs and lows, its ups and downs. However you choose to experience it is personalized to you. Don't let somebody else tell you that because you're not doing their program their way, that you're a dry drunk or you're not really pushing yourself. Nobody knows you like you know you, and you might still be trying to discover who you are in all of this. And these are 8 opportunities to go be around other people, listen to what they have to say, take in the inputs, go take action on it, because nothing good in life will ever come from just sitting there on the couch in your underwear, eating bonbons, watching The Simpsons all day. Yes, some self care will come from that potentially, and you should be thinking self care. But if your go to move is just clocking in, clocking out, and sitting on your couch waiting for life to get better, you're going to be vastly disappointed that it's not just going to magically show up at your front door. So go out there, take some action. If you want to know more about all this stuff, jessemogul.com. If you want to ask me a question, jessemogul.com/ask me. Hit on the coaching, hit on the NLP. I'm teaching neuro-linguistic programming for 10 weeks starting at the end of September. I know it's only like 2 weeks away. There's another one coming up in the spring. I do recovery coaching. I do a lot of public speaking. So if there's some aspect of all of this that you would like to have more front and center, those opportunities are there for you too. All right, my friends, as always, inclusivity over exclusivity, the power of positive energy, release and flow. Every day is the best day of our lives when we wake up sober. Shout out to Sunshine and Robert. Glow on, my friends. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.